caught trafficking these illicit poisons will be punished with a mandatory 10-year minimum sentence in prison.
Before the sun touched the skyline of Chicago, the city was trapped in a gray silence that felt almost sacred, except for one lingering memory echoing in the minds of federal commanders. Please, sir, save Chicago. That plea, quiet, desperate, and unforgettable, became the emotional ignition behind Operation Midway Blitz, a mission conceived not just as a law enforcement action, but as a battle for a city's soul. First, in the dim hours before dawn, ICE and DHS intelligence teams gathered inside the command center near Midway Airport, where digital maps glowed with clusters of red markers highlighting weeks of violent crimes tied to illegal migration streams across the Midwest. Next, Washington transmitted the final authorization at 04:12 a.m., ordering the mobilization of tactical teams. Armored engines idled under the fog as ICE, DHS, and CPD units formed convoys that rolled silently toward Little Village Cicero and Joliet. Then as the clock struck 5:30 a.m., as the evidence-mounted federal agencies began to see Operation Midway Blitz not as a reaction, but as a revelation. First, analysts compiled data from seized devices, safehouse maps, and cartel contact lists, producing a disturbingly coherent blueprint of CJNG's presence in the Midwest. Chicago was not an endpoint, it was a distribution heart. Next, cross-border intel teams identified the trafficking spine Mexico to Laredo, through Texas up to Missouri, and finally into Illinois. Migrants, some voluntary, some coerced, were used as operational camouflage, providing cover for couriers, drivers, watchers, and runners. Then ICE financial investigators identified shell companies registered under fake storefronts, car washes, tire shops, trucking depots, auto repair garages, and laundromats that never washed a single load of clothing. These businesses launched wire transfers ranging from $50,000 to $80,000, eventually amounting to over $12 million, frozen by DHS. Especially disturbing was the discovery of migrant labor being exploited through manipulation, debt bondage, or false job promises. Some were told they would receive visas. Instead, they became disposable transporters for fentanyl and cocaine. And more importantly, DHS identified a haunting pattern. 1 in every 5 migrants processed in certain Chicago corridors had direct or indirect contact with a cartel-linked employer, often without realizing it. Next, as surveillance drones traced heat signatures across industrial corridors, agents uncovered multiple dead drop zones where weapons parts, pill presses, and drug precursors were stashed inside refrigerated trucks. Then digital forensics revealed coordinated commands instructing operators to stay invisible, aligning perfectly with the cartel's strategy of embedding into chaotic migrant flows. Especially insightful was a comment from a senior DHS official reviewing the files. They didn't just infiltrate communities, they adapted to them. They became ghosts. And more importantly, that ghost-like structure allowed CJNG to mimic legitimate immigrant patterns, making detection nearly impossible without intensive interagency coordination. Next, as Washington reviewed the intelligence, the directive was unmistakable immediate escalation. 5 critical targets, warehouses, garages, safehouses, industrial compounds were marked for simultaneous raids. Then commanders gathered operators from ICE, DEA, FBI, HSI, and CPD into one synchronized strike force. Tactical medics checked gear, cyber units monitored burner phone activity, and helicopter crews ran low-sound rotor tests. Especially tense was the final moment before execution, when a Washington encrypted message flashed on the monitor: prepare for simultaneous strikes. And more importantly, every agent knew what that meant. The investigation phase was finished. The next phase would determine whether Chicago lived or fell. At 03:42 a.m., the command center hummed with a low, unnerving silence. First, 5 red markers blinked on the digital map: a warehouse in Bridgeview, a fortified garage in Cicero, a rail yard safe house near Midway, an industrial compound in Brighton Park, and a covert workshop near the tracks, all confirmed CJNG operational nodes. Next, the encrypted command from Washington appeared: all units execute. Then convoys of armored vehicles rolled out like a silent steel river through fog-thickened streets. DHS helicopters circled overhead with infrared cameras revealing human silhouettes glowing red on rooftops and inside buildings. Especially intense was the breach at Target 1. A flashbang detonated, shredding the silence as ICE and FBI teams stormed inside. Chemical vapors burned their lungs, while CJNG gunmen fired from catwalk platforms. The agents responded with disciplined bursts, neutralizing threats within 40 seconds. And more importantly, they secured the site without civilian casualties. Next, at the Midway rail yards, agents discovered fentanyl disguised as candy inside crates, plus a subterranean tunnel leading to a smuggling van fitted with false panels. Then across the city at Brighton Park, the most dangerous target agents encountered grenade blasts. A SWAT medic dragged a wounded officer behind cover, while teammates pressed forward through the smoke, exchanging fire in a deafening metal chamber. Especially harrowing was the moment grenades rolled across the floor, one detonating with enough force to shake an entire concrete stairwell. And more importantly, despite heavy resistance, agents cleared the structure with tactical precision. Next, radio chatter confirmed sequential victories: Echo 1, clear Bravo 2. Advancing Target 4, heavy resistance, Target 5 secured. Then by the time dust settled and dawn crept over Chicago's horizon, the numbers stunned even veteran commanders. 3 tons of narcotics seized, 37 firearms recovered, 2 grenade launchers confiscated, and 15 CJNG operatives captured alive. Especially remarkable, 0 civilian casualties. And more importantly, the success demonstrated the evolving capability of U.S. interagency operations, showing that when ICE, DEA, FBI, DHS, and local police unify their precision rivals, that of military special operations. Next, armored trucks rolled back toward command posts, cracked but victorious, carrying exhausted agents coated in dust and smoke. Then, as steam rose from wet streets, Chicago breathed cleaner air than it had in years. Operation Midway Blitz had delivered its most decisive strike, but commanders understood the war was far from over. Following the raids, the front line shifted from gunfire to forensic analysis. First, ICE financial teams loaded crates of documents, laptops, ledgers, and phones into the evidence room, each item carrying a potential link in CJNG's economic chain. Next, forensic accountants uncovered a lattice of shell companies, auto shops, tire depots, trucking outfits, fake laundromats stretching across Illinois, Indiana, Missouri, and Wisconsin. These companies funneled cash in structured transfers between $50,000 and $80,000, eventually totaling nearly $12 million in frozen assets. Then analysts traced labor patterns showing how recently arrived migrants were exploited. Some were coerced into driving trucks, others were assigned to watch corners or load crates, often unaware they were aiding cartel operations. Especially heartbreaking was the case of a 19-year-old undocumented driver caught hauling weapons parts and pill presses in a refrigerated semi-truck. He confessed he thought he was transporting food and had been promised $500 and a work visa. And more importantly, his case revealed how the cartel weaponized desperation, turning vulnerable migrants into unwitting participants in narcotics warfare. Next, cyber units cracked encrypted messages, showing meticulous operational discipline. Couriers rotated weekly safehouses, changed monthly, and identities were swapped through forged documents. Then surveillance drones detected heat signatures inside warehouse trucks, leading agents to hidden compartments filled with fentanyl precursors. Especially chilling was the realization that Chicago was merely one node in a multi-state infrastructure, an assembly line of drugs, money, and human exploitation. And more importantly, investigators identified a statistical pattern: for every 5 migrants processed in certain communities, one had a direct or indirect link to a cartel-managed job. Next, agents pieced together a philosophy embedded in cartel communications: move money, move product, stay invisible. Then a DHS analyst summarized the discovery: they didn't just infiltrate the system, they became ghosts inside it. Especially significant was that these ghosts did not rely on violence alone. They relied on camouflage within migrant flows, exploiting humanitarian chaos to mask logistical efficiency. And more importantly, that camouflage made detection nearly impossible without the kind of interagency coordination demonstrated during Midway Blitz. Next, as intelligence briefings reached Washington, federal leadership recognized the scope the mission had uncovered: not only a narcotics empire, but a parasitic economic network feeding off America's heartland. Then Phase 2 was authorized. Chicago was only the beginning. As the smoke of gunfights faded, a new storm rose, one not fought with weapons, but with voices and cameras. First, protests erupted outside ICE headquarters in downtown Chicago, where hundreds gathered holding signs reading "Families Not Felons," villains and stop the raids. Journalists crowded the sidewalks while activists denounced the operation as excessive, discriminatory, and harmful to innocent migrants. Next, community leaders claim many detainees had no criminal history, accusing federal agencies of tearing families apart. A pastor in Little Village declared through a megaphone they say they were targeting criminals, but they took mothers and fathers who never hurt anyone. Then social media amplified outrage with viral videos of crying children and midnight arrests. Hashtags polarized the nation, fueling debates on ethics, immigration, national security, and civil rights. Those convoys accelerated their tires, slicing across wet asphalt. Doors were rammed open, flashlights cut through narrow hallways and chaotic echoes. Babies, crying dogs, barking officers shouting federal warrant collided in a single surge of adrenaline. Especially in houses where migrants lived in overcrowded rooms, fear rose like static electricity. Teenagers pressed themselves against walls, while officers in tactical armor swept each corner with exacting precision. And more importantly, within mere minutes, the scale of apprehensions proved this was no ordinary operation. The teams detained over 550 individuals from Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. Some had criminal histories, some had recently crossed the border, and others were unknowingly entangled in larger networks. Especially heated were accusations that Midway Blitz used fear as a political tool rather than a protective measure. And more importantly, immigrant advocacy groups filed emergency motions demanding the release of detainees and transparency from DHS. Next, federal officials held a press conference defending the operation. ICE spokespeople emphasized that the raids had dismantled CJNG-linked networks using migrants as cover for trafficking narcotics and weapons. "We don't choose who criminals hide," among an ICE official stated. "We find them before more victims fall." Then DHS confirmed plans to expand Midway Blitz into Indiana, Wisconsin, and Missouri, citing ongoing intelligence showing cartel rerouting efforts. Especially polarizing was DHS's assertion that national security had to outweigh political pressure. And more importantly, the public divided sharply. Some praised the operation for protecting American neighborhoods, while others condemned it as a humanitarian failure. Next, Chicago residents felt the shift. Overdoses decreased. Suspicious vehicles vanished from industrial corridors. Parents reported safer walks to school. But fear lingered. Fear of raids for some, fear of cartels for others. Then commentators on national television framed the struggle as symbolic of America's identity crisis: security versus compassion, enforcement versus humanity. Especially uncertain was the question asked everywhere: can a nation remain safe without losing its soul? And more importantly, the operation forced Americans to confront a truth rarely spoken: crime and migration, once separate issues, had become intertwined through exploitation, manipulation, and desperation. The aftermath did not close the chapter. It opened a national argument still unresolved. By the end of September, Chicago stood quieter than it had in years. First, police reported fewer overdoses, fewer cartel-linked vehicles, and a sharp decline in suspicious warehouse activity. Ordinary residents began to sense relief, cautious, fragile, but real. Next, inside the command center near Midway Airport, agents continued reviewing digital leads streaming from Mexico, Texas, and the Midwest. The battle wasn't over, it had merely evolved. Then DHS released a public report praising Operation Midway Blitz as a model of interagency precision: ICE, DEA, FBI, DHS, and CPD operating with near-military coordination. Especially significant was the recognition that the operation had struck at a network using the chaos of migration to hide industrial-scale narcotics distribution. And more importantly, agents understood that CJNG wasn't defeated, it was adapting. Next, federal planners launched Phase 2, expanding surveillance to freight corridors, truck depots, rail yards, and financial transfers across 3 additional states. Drones would guard logistics routes. Cyber teams would track every digital ripple linked to cartel operators. Then, one morning as the sun rose over Lake Michigan, a senior supervisor exhausted voice summed up the mission with a quiet truth: we're not just guarding borders anymore. We're guarding what it means to be American. Especially powerful was the understanding that Operation Midway Blitz wasn't political theater. It was a response to a hidden war waged in alleys, warehouses, loading docks, and migrant shelters. And more importantly, it exposed the uncomfortable reality that national security no longer lived only at the border. It lived in every neighborhood, every factory, every classroom affected by illegal narcotics. Next, as analysts compiled final reports, they highlighted the courage of hundreds of agents who faced grenades, automatic gunfire, fentanyl poisoning risks, and fortified cartel structures. They acted not for headlines, but for families who feared walking their own streets. Then media outlets across the country began acknowledging a deeper theme: when law enforcement unites, organized crime loses the shadows it depends on. Especially clear was the message sent across the continent: if cartels hide inside America, America will go into the dark and drag them back into the light. And more importantly, the conclusion etched into the final briefing of Operation Midway Blitz echoed across all agencies: the United States does not merely defend territory, it defends identity, safety, justice, and the promise that every community deserves to live free from fear. The mission wasn't over, but America had made its stand. Yet even as wrists were cuffed and suspects loaded into vans, a deeper chill crept into the minds of commanders. The operation was unfolding too smoothly, too uniformly, as if something larger, something concealed, was waiting behind the first layer. Next, when all preliminary suspects were processed, agents reconvened to assess the early field notes. Several houses displayed reinforced walls, mismatched electrical wiring, and suspicious traffic patterns. One agent reviewing body cam footage paused at an odd detail: a tablet left streaming encrypted messages from Mexico. And more importantly, the translated text revealed logistical terms, shipment codes, and confirmation notes inconsistent with migrant smuggling alone. That was the moment federal leadership realized the Dawn Raid had not concluded the operation. They had merely opened the first door into a far darker system buried deep beneath Chicago's neighborhoods. At sunrise, when Chicago's sky warmed from steel gray to pale gold, a strange duality settled over the city. The streets were calm, but the law enforcement channels were electric. First agents confirmed the arrest count: over 550 suspects in a single sweep, an astonishing number that triggered immediate suspicion among commanders who sensed that such volume indicated structural infiltration rather than scattered crime. Next, field teams relayed details from homes they had raided. Several suspects attempted to destroy phones, smash SIM cards, or flush documents. One woman tried to hide a ledger inside a baby's crib. Another man sprinted out a back alley carrying a plastic bag filled with cash. Then FBI cyber specialists recovered deleted data at lightning speed, restoring fragments of text threads, transfer receipts, and GPS coordinates. These pieces began forming a mosaic too complex to belong to a mere migrant network. Especially striking was the behavior of certain apprehended individuals: calm, rehearsed, watchful. They observed the officers more than they resisted, as if measuring response patterns. This psychological detail alerted agents that seasoned operators were embedded among ordinary migrants. And more importantly, those operators behaved like trained couriers who expected arrest, but trusted the organization behind them to continue functioning. Next, each arrest location revealed anomalies: homes with 2-foot thick walls, reinforced basements, industrial-grade ventilation systems, and odd heat signatures picked up earlier by DHS helicopters. One building barely wide enough for a family concealed a crawl space large enough to store automotive-sized crates. Then, as the evidence vans filled, analysts sorted thousands of items: burner phones, wiring diagrams, coded notebooks, foreign SIM cards, tracking beacons, and stacks of cash in denominations typical of cartel distribution hubs. Especially chilling was the discovery of a message recovered from a cracked cell phone: hold until next wave. That next wave implied logistics, timing, and coordination across borders, not the spontaneous migration narrative activists often argued. And more importantly, once arrested suspects were transported to federal holding centers, DHS cross-referenced their identities with entries flagged along the Mexico-Texas corridor. Shockingly, dozens matched suspicious travel patterns linked to CJNG transit routes. Next, as commanders gathered in a dim, crowded briefing room, they realized the implication: Operation Midway Blitz had not targeted a loose, chaotic migrant influx. It had collided directly with a sophisticated, cartel-driven infrastructure embedded inside Chicago's migrant communities. Then came the question no one wanted to articulate, but everyone felt pressing against their ribs. If 550 arrests were only the surface, what monster was hiding underneath? By noon, Operation Midway Blitz shifted from an immigration mission to a full-scale criminal exposure. First, ICE teams, executing follow-up searches, uncovered concealed compartments containing staggering amounts of narcotics: 680 pounds of methamphetamine, 62 kilos of cocaine, and a spread of firearms ranging from handguns to AR-15 variants, all wrapped with identical Mexican shipping labels. Next, evidence technicians noticed repeating serial patterns suggesting a centralized supplier. The stacks of pistols were factory-sealed, not street traded. activated. The meth bricks were uniformly pressed. Even the cash bundles were machine wrapped. Then a breach team in Brighton Park discovered a wall built nearly 2 feet thicker than standard construction codes. After demolishing it with a hydraulic ram, they found 4 industrial money counters, 3 fake passports, and a tablet streaming encrypted Spanish language messages. Especially alarming was the live chat feed showing real-time communication between unknown senders in Mexico and a recipient logged into the Chicago device only moments before officers stormed the room. The messages decrypted to phrases like "shipment confirmed, load is moving north," and "payment cleared." And more importantly, timestamps confirmed messages were sent minutes before agents arrived, meaning cartel operatives monitored Chicago's distribution nodes continuously. Next, FBI analysts cross-referenced the digital signatures with prior intelligence from Texas and Missouri. The same terminology appeared in cartel logistics files associated with CJNG operations. Then, as tech specialists traced routing numbers, the same pattern emerged: narcotics shipments routed through Jalisco, Laredo, Texas, Missouri, Chicago. Especially revealing was the discovery of color-coded maps in a Southside apartment charting warehouses, drop points, cash houses, and safe house rotations. Notes beside each location listed names, car models, and delivery windows. And more importantly, the maps positioned Chicago not as a final destination, but as a redistribution hub for the entire Midwest. Next, during a mid-afternoon briefing, one ICE agent looked at the evidence table phones buzzing with missed cartel messages, cash counting machines still warm, and muttered, "This wasn't an immigration sweep." We walked straight into their command center. Then, as the weight of that truth settled over the room, Washington raised threat levels and ordered strategic escalation. The discovery phase was over. The battlefield had been exposed. Chicago was not being infiltrated by chance. It was being operated as an industrial node of cartel logistics, and the deeper teams dug, the clearer the picture became. The cartel was already here, running a silent empire beneath the city's feet.